This is Rashawn Slater, first round draft pick for the LA Chargers, and you're listening to the Charged Up Bolts podcast. Bolt up.
Hello, and welcome to the Charged Up Bolts podcast. I'm your host, Elliott Bermudez, and on this podcast, we bring you the latest Chargers news. We preview and review everything about the Chargers, and of course, as today, we bring you the hottest Chargers interviews there could possibly be. Who wants to hear from an NFL player, someone on the roster? We have the one, the only, a little bit of a hero of mine, Garrett Sisti from the Lightning Round podcast. How are you, my friend?
Oh, man, after that welcome, I'm just warm and fuzzy. And who needs players just giving you, the generic answers when you can just have some fun people on to talk Chargers? So, yeah, thank you so much. I've been an admirer of you. We've talked a lot on Twitter, and I'm just happy to be able to meet you here virtually, and thanks for having me on, man.
Oh, man. It's, as I said to Jamie, the Lightning Round's been an inspiration for the reason the podcast exists. We're more in an international feel over here in the UK, but we got started because we used to write a bit of a magazine that went out in the UK and a website, and listened to you religiously. I think you were the only true podcast out there that I ever got to my little taste of California and the Chargers. So you inspired us to be here. So to have you on is fantastic. But I want to know a little bit more about you, about the guy I listen to several times a week, whether it be on YouTube or the podcast. What's your background? How come you're a Chargers fan?
Like most Charger fans who have had to endure this for so long, brought up in the family. I had my dad and mom were Charger fans, and I was taken to training camp a lot as a kid. Remember being one of those kids, as I see now, getting in line to get autographs at Chargers Park in San Diego and getting lots of autographs and watching every game. And then it eventually kind of transitioned into, once I was out on my own, I became a season ticket holder with some of my roommates in my early teens and early 20s. And I have been going to games ever since. I actually kicked off my bachelor party at a Charger game. That's how it started, tailgating at 10 a.m. Well, earlier than that for a 10 a.m. game. And then, and then it evolved and started to write about the Chargers. And then here we are podcasting. And then here I am on your show.
Wow, you've made it.
Finally.
Yeah, you're finally at the big time. Do you know what, though? I used to feel sorry for you. I remember vividly driving to play football with my mates. It was torrential rain here in the north of England, and I was listening to your podcast, and you did a whole episode on Halloween, Mike McCoy, this thunder and lightning, and you painted this picture that made me feel sorry for you. But as you just told me that you've been to Chargers training camp as a kid and your bachelor party, you're not my hero anymore. I'm just jealous.
Yeah, we make our own fun. There's been a lot of bad seasons and some bad players, some bad coaching. There's been a lot of ups and downs with this team for sure. And we have made our own fun, and yes, there have been definitely some really happy moments too.
Well, I'd like to hear about those. I started supporting the Chargers the year after we last won the division. I think it was about 2008. And I said to Jamie about this, my first ever game I watched as a Chargers fan was against the Vikings. And the first kickoff came from Nate Kading, and Percy Harvin returned it for a touchdown. And I thought, I've set a very low bar to begin with. What were your earliest happy memories? What were the real standout moments as a Chargers fan?
I mean, I think it was going to training camp was a lot of fun moments, but I think that Super Bowl run was one of the peak moments for me, just because, I remember as soon as they beat the Steelers and they were on to the Super Bowl, I went outside I had an inflatable Chargers helmet. It was like this big thing that you can blow up. And I went out with my neighbor friend who was also a Chargers fan. And we just stood on the corner in my street, and we had our Charger gear, and we're waving at every car, and they were honking. And then I remember there was just kind of groundswell in just my neighborhood of when they beat the Steelers, because we ran as soon as they beat them. We ran right out the door in our Charger gear, and we greeted everybody we could. And then my dad, because I was young at the time, said, "Let's go over to the stadium. I'm sure there's people celebrating everything." And we got in the car and we drove to the stadium, Jack Murphy at the time. And I just remember driving from the street to hitting the freeway. People were honking their horns and nobody was mad, but there was this collective energy of everybody excited that the Chargers, our San Diego Chargers, were going to the Super Bowl. So there were just all these horns honking everywhere in their cars. And I just remember everywhere, just all these horns. And it was such an excitement. And there was this buzz around the city and going all the way to the stadium. And we didn't end up going to the stadium because people had the same idea we did. Everybody drove to the stadium to go celebrate inside. They didn't open it up, but everybody was just around the stadium, getting out of their cars, celebrating, having the radio blaring, the San Diego Superchargers song playing real loud. And I just remember driving under the bridge, passing the stadium, everybody honking. People were on the bridge right before the stadium in San Diego. There was a bridge that crossed that you could actually park and then walk across to get to the stadium. And people had got out of their cars and were waving to all the cars down on the freeway, and we were one of them. And I remember it was so slow on the freeway, I was able to stand out of the passenger side window and wave to everybody. And that, I think, was one of my favorite Chargers moments. I wasn't at the game. I watched the game, but to feel that excitement of a city and all of us collectively being excited for this team, our Chargers, was just something that I don't think I'll ever forget. I mean, I have a lot of other happy memories of going to games, but even though I wasn't there, I just remember being so excited, and I loved that buzz from everybody in San Diego. And then I remember we ended up going and meeting the bus when they came back home, and they had a big thing inside the stadium that I ended up going to, and everybody talked on mic. That was one of my favorite memories. But I think the day they beat the Steelers and were able to go to the Super Bowl, and everybody just excited and having a whole city behind this football team, it was so exciting, and probably my favorite Chargers memory to date.
That is sensational, the way you paint that picture. And actually, you touch into something that I feel strongly about in sport in general, is that there's lots of good moments and bad moments, and there's those small elations where a touchdown that wins you the game. Mike Williams against the Chiefs, scoring a goal in soccer, football, as we call it. And but the true electric atmosphere of being in a community that all knows what's going on and all is excited, pulling together, there's nothing like it. I've experienced it a couple of times when Spain, I'm from Spain, when Spain won the World Cup, I was in Spain, the electricity everywhere, there were people jumping in fountains, and I know what you mean. You don't need to see anything sporting or even be in a stadium. It's just being everywhere, and everyone knows. You have that look with that guy, and you're out there. That is a fantastic, sensational memory. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah.
I'm going to make you miserable now.
Okay.
What's your low point as a Chargers fan?
I think a low point, and people probably might not want to hear this, but it was actually on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. It was the day that Dean Spano said they were moving out of San Diego. I was in San Diego, and I remember I was in the bagel shop. I went to go get a bagel that morning, and I remember seeing the news and just being absolutely devastated. And I walked in, and there was a guy who looked pretty upset too, and he had a Chargers hat on. I think he put it on that morning, not thinking that he wouldn't have a team that after that, a couple hours later. But he had this, and he was behind me in line, and I remember I was like, "Hey, I'll pay for whatever he's having too," because I just felt terrible for him, because I felt the same way. And I remember he. An older guy. I mean, he was probably 20, 30 years older than I was. And so I know he's probably seen a lot more Charger history than I have. And he said thanks, and he was getting a little emotional, and we didn't say anything, but he gave me a big hug, and we both hugged, a total stranger. And then we both went our separate ways, but it was kind of this unspoken, we both kind of were mourning this loss at the same time. And that was kind of a low point, because the move was really, everybody, I don't think anybody loved the move, especially if they were in San Diego. And that's still kind of a touchy subject even today, but
San Diego
just,
yeah.
You are? Oh, good for you. All right. Boy, do I hate that salty moniker. But anyway, so So I didn't say a word to this guy, but there was just this kind of like hug and kind of this like missing this thing that we all had collectively shared, on the other end of the spectrum when we're just in San Diego, everybody's happy, honking horns, to, it felt like a loss, a big loss of some kind, almost of like a family.
Yeah.
I don't want to say family member, but
Close
something
enough.
is like, something is part of your family, something, because, we were all, I remember thinking like when it first happened going, when I have kids, I one of my other highlights is playing catch in the parking lot with my dad, throwing the football back and forth in the parking lot and walking in with him and getting autographs with him. And it's like, well, how am I going to do that with my son? I wanted to pass that on to my son. So, I think there was this collective like sadness around the city, and that day in the bagel shop, getting a hug from a complete stranger as we both kind of lost something was kind of a real low point, and probably the lowest point I can think of as being a Charger fan. And it didn't, again, it's something that didn't happen on the field. Something just as two human beings, we just kind of were grieving this loss. So that I think was a real, definitely probably the lowest point I can think of being a Charger fan.
I can see that. I can't imagine having my team ripped away. And I know the distances in America are much bigger. I'm a Sheffield Wednesday fan, and you've probably never heard of them, biggest team in the UK. I've never lived in Sheffield, and I'm a couple of hours away. But the idea that they would move from their historical home, you ripped away, and it is close to having a loss and going into mourning. But we're still here. We're still Chargers fans.
Yes,
It affected you a lot more than it did me. I think probably the Chargers got a little closer to me by going north. I don't know. But,
a little bit north.
I was hoping for London at the time, but not quite.
Not quite.
But, we support the Chargers, and they're still in California. It's an exciting team. We've been through some disappointing times with the elite coaches that were Mike McCoy and Anthony Lynn.
Yep.
And now we embark on a new era, and it feels different. As someone who supported the team in about 2007-8, it feels this is different. This is not the old Chargers. It's a new identity, and with Staley, something even fresher and more exciting. Are you really excited by Staley's Chargers? Are you caught up in all the hype and the excitement of what he brings?
I mean, I am. As far as I've been doing the podcast, or even just as a fan, every kind of Charger hire has just been like, I guess so. And then when Mike McCoy happened, I remember Jamie and I were podcasting at the time, just going, I don't understand this. And then when Anthony Lynn was hired, we go, he's got no experience. How do we know he's good at anything, really? And so we were never really excited about any of the head coaching hires. And even before they hired Staley, there was kind of like our top choices were Brian Dable, who is now coaching the Giants, and it was Brandon Staley, and they were 1A and 1B for us, and we just were like, this would be a home run pick. These guys deserve to be head coaches, and we'd be so excited. And when they ended up hiring Staley, it's been a real kind of breath of fresh air. It's analytics driven. There's definitely a gamble when he's in game in his coaching decisions, which some people might not like. I particularly do. And the aggressiveness that he's brought on in free agency and through the draft. It's a whole different Chargers team. Unfortunately, they didn't make the playoffs this year, but they've got all the pieces this year. And, it's easy to get real excited about everybody on this team. But I think Brandon Staley's the perfect guy to bring it all together. So this definitely is a different feel from any other Charger season we've seen in, a few decades, really. This is a very exciting football team, and it's got a lot of talent top to bottom.
No, I don't disagree with you. And it's the kind of coach I want in charge of my franchise. You're analytics driven, looking at them, being aggressive. You've got a spectrum. And at one end, you've got Dan Campbell, Anthony Lynn type coach, and the other side you've got Staley, and that's where I want to be. And it's an experiment I'm excited about. Interestingly, just on Tom Telesco, a few people, myself included, I'll admit, I like Tom, but I think it could be his last rodeo. If we didn't make the playoffs this season, I think it could be his last time as our GM. Are you a fan of him? Do you think he succeeded? I've heard mixed views. People seem to be very split on whether Tom has been a successful GM.
Yeah, I think Tom Telesco's made enough hits in the draft to kind of keep him around. I didn't want Tom Telesco around to make a third head coaching hire. I thought bringing on Mike McCoy, bringing on Anthony Lynn was enough to fire him as a GM. There's not many GMs in the NFL that gets a third coaching hire. Mm-hmm. You get to pick your one, and if that doesn't work, you get a retry. But after that, you're the one at the top, so you need to kind of answer for those wrong calls. And unfortunately, those two didn't work out. But it seems like the Spanos were happy enough to let Telesco pick a third head coach, and I think this is the one that he got right. So, from that perspective, I didn't want Tom Telesco around a few years ago. So I am more down on Telesco than most people are. I don't think he's hit enough in his draft classes, and I think at free agency he's whiffed way too often. And then, of course, as I say that, this is the one-off season where he hit everything and took the home run swings, and I couldn't ask for a better free agency plan than the one he put together. We did a podcast on it, and it was almost shaped exactly like how Tom Telesco did when free agency actually hit. So it's hard to argue with what he did this offseason. I think he's kind of gained a little bit more favor with everybody, me included. So I'm somewhere in the middle on him right now, being down on him for a while. So I'm somewhere, kind of, I'm not hot on him, not cold on him. I'm just kind of, in the middle at this point and kind of wait and see. Cause if these free agency pickups don't work out, I mean, I don't know how much longer you can keep him around. So
you can't, no.
No.
So I'm in the middle. He must be a listener of your podcast then, clearly stealing your ideas. Just join the back of the queue, Tom.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe this year. Definitely not in years past, because he has done nothing we wanted.
True, and of course we've started calling him Fourth and Telesco because he's obviously making those swing for the home run kind of moves. But it's definitely exciting. It's what you want, and the salary cap surely is a myth. So why wouldn't you just try and keep perpetually bringing in big talent if you can? Yeah. And Derwin's re-signed, big money. Herbert surely coming up next. It's an exciting time to be a Chargers fan. There's loads of hype. And what's interesting, so we hear, you hear sometimes in the media, the Chargers have no fans, right? Mm-hmm. It's a thing I've heard before. But actually, when you come over to the UK, you notice a lot of Chargers fans. You notice people know who Herbert is. It's getting a lot of traction over here and across where our listeners are all across the globe. And what I find interesting is when I went to Wembley for the second time, the Herbert win against Tennessee, what a game. The vast majority of Wembley were Chargers fans. And I've been to a lot of games. That doesn't happen that often over here. So it's sensational. So we're gaining this traction. There's hype around us. We are one of the names people talk about for a Super Bowl run. Has the preseason burst your bubble like it seems to be doing to Chargers Twitter, or are you still thinking what the starters aren't in there? Let's just see what happens.
No, I'm actually on the exact opposite spectrum, to be honest with you. I mean, to me, obviously there's no starters, and preseason almost never matters except for your bottom depth guys. But to me, it seems like there's a lot more exciting bottom depth guys this year than we've seen in years past, for sure. Seeing like Morgan Fox show up and Chris Rumph show up, Joshua Palmer have an incredible game last week. We see Jasir Taylor flashing a little bit. There's a lot of guys just around the bottom of this depth chart, that Michael Bandy being another one.
Yeah, he's a big name.
Yeah, that have really flashed. And, it seems like for most fans, you could tune out halfway through the second quarter, but going into the third and fourth quarter, there's some exciting things and some players still showing up and doing some things. So even though they gave up 2 big special teams touchdowns with nothing but young rookies and UDFAs out there, I'm not all that worried about it. I personally kind of like how this team is kind of shaping up at the bottom of the depth chart, and there's some real competition, which is something Brandon Staley's been preaching since the beginning of camp, is that people are going to have to earn some roster spots. So you see some guys kind of stepping up and kind of making some noise in the preseason, like we've seen like Carlo Kemp, a name that we hadn't really heard about, flash a lot last week and this Saturday. And we saw, Brendan Fehoko making some noise, who's at the bottom of the depth chart, Joe Gaziano. And so it's kind of interesting to see these guys really play and play deep into this game and still, fight for that roster spot. So to me, I'm not down on the Chargers during the preseason. I don't think the score really matters. I think it's more about the process. And early on, I think the processes have been nice, even with all those special teams blunders on Saturday.
No, don't. I know. Let's hope that gets fixed, because it can't be much worse than it has been in previous seasons. Although, we started off probably a bit worse.
Yeah.
I'm interested. So I spoke to Jamie, and he is a massive Jerry Tillery fan, allegedly.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. He does. That's for sure.
He absolutely loves that man. Thinks he's MVP material.
Can't shut up about him. Loves him.
Who's your favorite player that gets you excited? You think is going to have a big year in a Chargers uniform?
Ooh, I guess so. I mean, obvious answers are like Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa and J.C. Jackson. But I am really excited to see Zion Johnson in this offensive line. I just posted a clip that he did today against the Cowboys, but just through the preseason. I mean, early on watching, and I don't want to overhype this because we're talking about preseason, but in the first day of camp last year, watching Rashawn Slater, the second he hit the field, you were like, this kid is special. You knew. And I remember just telling everybody that was within earshot and everybody on Twitter that I can get a hold of that this is not just a left tackle. They got a potentially franchise type left tackle. And it was just so clear day one how good he was. And then this year, being there first day of camp and seeing Zion Johnson, it was just like, this is the best guard we've seen in a while on this team. And I remember he went up the first day he went up on one-on-ones, he like stonewalled Sebastian Joseph Day, and then Austin Johnson, who's a mammoth, couldn't gain any ground on him. And then he put Jerry Tillery on his face, and I just went, he's going against starters, and he's making him look silly. So I think for me, outside of the obvious names, I cannot wait to see Zion Johnson in this offensive line next to Corey Linsley and getting some help out from some of these other guys and learning from Matt Filer and Rashawn Slater. I just cannot wait to see him in the starting lineup. Right tackle is kind of still a question mark, but I think Zion Johnson's really going to help this offensive line, and I just can't wait to see him throughout the season.
I'm with you, and he was my call on the podcast here to say that we were going to pick him when I had to put it on the line. It felt like a David DeCastro moment, which the Steelers got 16, I think, maybe about 16 when they took him, and it was the same. And I'm so excited that he's popping, and I saw that thing you retweeted. He just bodies the man downfield, and I'm like, I'll take some of that, please.
Yeah.
On the flip side, what area do you think the Chargers still need to focus on? Do we have a weakness to be exploited?
I think so. I've mentioned this before, but I think there's 3 spots in which Telesco and the Chargers didn't upgrade this offseason that I think they really needed to. Right tackle is one of them, which we just talked about. I mean, obviously with Trey Pipkins and Storm Norton kind of still fighting for that starting job, getting a right tackle seemed very important this offseason, and they decided that they thought they were good enough with Storm Norton and Trey Pipkins. And if they play to the way they've played in the past, they could be in trouble. The other one is at linebacker. I know they got Kyle Van Noy, but letting Kaiser White walk and not really upgrading that unit other than getting, a veteran presence, which is fine, and Troy Reeder kind of being a middle bottom depth chart linebacker. I thought they really needed to get a starting caliber, like young, fresh linebacker, and they didn't end up doing that. And I think Tranquil and Van Noy are going to do good enough. We know pretty early on that, Staley doesn't really value the second level as much as some other teams might. But, I think with the rotation of some of these younger guys, it might end up working out. I'm not as worried about the linebacker core as I am, say, right tackle. And then the other thing was speed at wide receiver. I thought, in the draft they could get a wide receiver 3. Joshua Palmer seems to be doing just fine in that wide receiver 3. And getting DeAndre Carter's nice in a role as a returner. But I thought as a speed option later on going into 2023, 2024, it would have been nice to pick up somebody in the 3rd, 4th round as a speed guy that could help you out. And so now they've got some real talent in that wide receiver core, but they just don't have that game-breaking speed. And a lot of these teams that are going deep in the playoffs do. And so, it kind of hurt the Chargers late in last year, not having a guy that can take the top off of defense. So I think in those 3 areas, they didn't really kind of shore those up in the offseason. And I think those could be weak points, especially if some injuries happen. But I think those are kind of the rough edges of this team. I think they're pretty stacked in a lot of other areas and deeper in some areas that we haven't seen in a long, long time, especially like defensive line. But I think of those 3 spots, if the Chargers were to falter at all, it's going to be one of those 3 spots, I think.
Yeah, and I'm really, really glad you said that. I got a lot of stick on Twitter. You know, at the draft, I was Zion Johnson, obvious candidate. But I was screaming out saying, "Are you really going to go into this season with an injured Murray and an injured Tranquil as your linebacker core?" And I like the signings they've made, but they aren't premier. And I know everyone said to me he doesn't value it; it's not essential in his scheme. But I agree. I think we're quite thin there, and it could be the issue. If we have some injuries in that position. I wasn't on the wide receiver train, mainly because I'm really high on Palmer, and I thought, if you do bring in some speed, I understand you want a Tyreek Hill. Who doesn't want that? But I like the idea of giving these guys a chance, and we have those options. We don't have someone to take the top off Jalen Guyton. But I think we can potentially cope, but I don't disagree with you at all. So the big question. Is this the season? Are we going all the way? Where do you see the Chargers genuinely in your heart of hearts going in this Super Bowl campaign?
I don't see them winning the division still. I have a hard time betting against Andy Reid ever. I mean, he's good for 11, 12 wins every single season. It's automatic. And when you've got Patrick Mahomes, even with all the losses this offseason, I think they're not going to be as good as they have been in the past, but I do think that they're still top dog in the AFC West in a stacked AFC West at that. So I think while they're going to make it competitive for sure, I still think Chiefs end up winning this AFC West, and I think the Chargers are going to have to win a wild card spot, which I think they will do. And I think once they get in the playoffs, I think all bets are off. It's Buffalo and Kansas City, and the Chargers is kind of like a 3-horse race for that AFC crown. So I think it's going to be real, real tight. I think the Chargers are going to definitely get in the playoffs, and I think they're going to make some noise for sure.
Do you know what? You're getting me hyped. I'm ready. Do you know what I'm doing? Soon as I finish this recording, I'm going up and I'm watching the first episode of the Chargers special. Is it called All In? All In?
All In, yep.
I'm going to go and watch that. You've got me all excited. I'm ready for this season.
Yeah.
And then we'll lose the first game or something stupid like that.
Well, it'll be all right.
Let's hope not. Thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure to finally get you on here. We'd love to have you back.
Of course.
Where can we find you?
I mean, I'm at Garrett Sisti. I'm part as Bez has mentioned. At Lightning Round is the podcast. Lightning Round podcast is the podcast we're at. Once you're done listening to this one, Charged Up Bolts, go ahead and go listen to Lightning Round 2. There's obviously enough time in the day to listen to us both every single time. So that's where I'm at, and I just appreciate you having me, man. I'm glad I get to finally meet you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and let's hope we talk again with a Super Bowl ring on some of these fingers of the Chargers players.
Yes, yeah, us too. We got to get some too.
Yeah, let's order them off of Wish, probably off Wish.com.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's a pleasure to have you. Bolt up.
Too. Thank you.
This is Rashawn Slater, first round draft pick for the LA Chargers, and you're listening to the Charged Up Bolts podcast. Bolt up.